I remember when I first watched John Huston's adaptation of Moby Dick. It had Gregory Peck as Captain Ahab, and in the opening credits, so this is a 1950s movie, they had a special thanks for Mystic Seaport for consulting them. And so I'm watching that as a 19-year-old college freshman going, woo woo, local Connecticut spirit.
Did you have to watch Voyage of the Mimi in high school? Or no, elementary school, sorry.
Voyage of the what?
Voyage of the Mimi. It was this little, like, made-for-TV educational thing, but it was basically like a scientific research boat that went out and was researching, I think, humpback whales and their habits and stuff, because we did a whole, like, whale unit where we talked about them, and it was interesting because it actually, like, even dealt with the deaf character, and the captain is like this, he's like, how am I supposed to deal with her if she can't, and the guy that's working with it, he, like, just knocks on the thing and says you can get her attention different ways, and he's like, oh, that works, okay, we're good. We're good to go, let's hit the seas.
It's like somebody didn't know how to open a door. It's like, wait, I'm supposed to go into this building? How am I supposed to go into this building? There is no way that we can get into this building. And someone just turns the knob on the door and opens it.
And then the problem has ceased to exist, and it is right into it. So, yeah, that was an interesting one.
And then it gets really interesting because then you start blaming somebody else for why you didn't get it.
Yeah. Well, I think some people do that. I think people that have a little more maturity maybe say, oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, not everybody has maturity. That's the problem.
Exactly.
Hello and welcome to Moviehouse Mystics, where the magic of movies come to life. I'm Kevin Gainey.
And I'm Cody Yule. So, Kevin, I was getting some routine blood work done yesterday, and it occurred to me that it's not as much of a fun fact as kind of the quirky stuff we usually do, but it's this misconception people still have that blood is only red once it's been oxygenated through the heart and lungs, and that's just not true. And I was thinking about that when I got my blood drawn, because we all have seen the tubes and stuff. And what color, Kevin, is the blood when it comes out of your veins and goes into the tube?
I don't know.
It's red. There is no oxygen introduced except for maybe a tiny minuscule amount that's in the needle or something, but it's not any sort of substantial amount. No, the blood in your veins is still red. The blueness comes from the fact that you're used to kind of the red tones in your skin, and then it's a darker red that's in the veins, and your brain plays some tricks on you and it looks a little blue, and then they've just adapted that for models and stuff and illustrations because that they don't want to have just two different shades of red. Red and blue is easy to distinguish.
I totally understand that, but it's also reminding me of a period when, because we have YouTube now, I have looked up certain surgeries that friends and families have had. It wasn't that I was grossed out by the insides of the human body. I was just frustrated because all the organs were the same color. And it's like, wait a minute, in the textbook, the liver is brown, the stomach is yellow, one of the intestines is green. And I'm like, well, what the heck am I going to do here? How do I know which one's which?
Yeah, it's an illustration so that people can see. But then you have to think these medical students or something start actually getting in there. And they're like, I've been lied to my whole life. But no, it's. I thought that was an important one to mention, is almost a public service announcement. Horseshoe crabs do have blue blood, and that also serves an important medical usage. They use it for when they're making sterile solutions, and they can use that to drop into a batch of, not the whole thing, to take a sample and drop it in, and then if it interacts in a certain way, they know it's contaminated, and it's a very valuable substance. But they have blue blood. Humans do not really, under any circumstance, have blue blood.
Okay, so you heard it here on Moviehouse Mystics. Blood is not blue. Blood is red.
Well, speaking of blood, we do have an important holiday that is about people who have sacrificed some of their own blood for this country that's coming up.
Yes, that's Veterans Day. So this episode will either be released on Veterans Day or maybe just a couple days after. But we figured we had to have an episode where we gave our thanks to the troops. To the troops, blah, sorry.
Now, Kevin, have you served in the military?
No. How about you?
Nope.
How do you think you would have done?
I think both of us would have just been side characters that stayed in the foxhole and then somehow ironically ended up saving the entire day. If Hollywood has taught us anything, that's what happens.
Well, that's not how it works. It's not a movie. It's real life.
Yeah, that's fair. But do you have anyone in your life that does have military experience?
Oh, yes, quite a few. On my mom's side, my grandfather served in the Army. My cousin Chelsea is a Marine veteran. And on my dad's side, there is a Navy legacy to the extreme. My grandfather went to the Naval Academy at Annapolis. In fact, I'm repping it right now.
I've actually heard of that place.
Well, I would hope that you heard of the military academies.
Well, I'm much more familiar with West Point. I always used to pass it on the way to New York on the train.
Well, the Army-Navy football game is a big deal for my family every year. And not just my grandfather going to the Naval Academy and his legacy there. My uncle did med school through the Navy. One of my cousins just left the Navy as a pilot. And my brother Andrew is still serving in the Navy.
Now, that is a legacy.
And what about you, Coda?
So my grandfather was a captain in the Air Force.
Well, my grandfather was a captain in submarines.
Well, good to know they had us protected from above and below. So my Uncle Art also had some military experience, I believe, in the Army. And one of my good friends from college, his wife, was in the Army. I actually have the patch from the base in Germany that she served at.
In Germany? I thought we took care of them like half a century ago.
Oh, yes, we did. But now U.S. has bases all over the world.
USA! USA! USA!
Pipe down, Kevin. But it's fitting I do mention Germany because today's movie does have a lot to do with that country.
Yes, we are discussing the 1998 classic Steven Spielberg movie, Saving Private Ryan.
Yes, and we mentioned Spielberg in quite a few hypotheticals in our last episode.
And I think this was appropriate for us to do this episode with Veterans Day just around the corner.
Even if it goes out late.
And my mom does a lot of work with veterans through the Equus Effect, which is helping vets with PTSD through equine therapy.
Oh, that's great. I know you mentioned the horses quite a bit.
Well, we're doing more than just keeping them in the pasture. And there's also Home Base, which is an organization with the Boston Red Sox. A good family friend of ours, Joe Calnan, she works with them.
Oh, wow. Red Sox, another great New England connection. So how about you refresh us on some of the basic details of the film?
After successfully securing the Normandy beaches on D-Day, Captain John Miller, played by Tom Hanks, is sent to find Private James Ryan, played by Matt Damon, whose brothers were killed in action, to send him home and spare the family any further suffering.
So we were texting while I watched the movie for my first time, as we often do, and I asked you about this concept. How far-fetched is it that they would be extracting a soldier because somebody in their family was killed? And then you told me that this is actually a real policy called the sole survivor policy.
Yes, it wasn't made official until after World War II, but it was practiced discreetly before then.
So when was your first time seeing the film?
I probably saw the D-Day scene several times through high school when it came to military history, but we watched it in full, or at least I watched it in full, my freshman year in college, and it was a real shocker for us to get a glimpse of the insanity that the troops had to endure when they landed on the beaches.
Interesting, yeah, because usually in history classes we think of things as like they're in the past, and you really just get a snapshot of what's going on versus like this, you're right in the action.
Well, one of the movies reviews that I found that was just so interesting summarized it as, you don't romanticize yourself participating in this battle. It's so real, you're thinking, get me out of here.
Yeah, he takes it right up to the threshold. In the moment that you're just like, oh, this is too much, it starts to move right along.
So, being your first screening, what did you think of the movie?
I thought it was great. Some of the war scenes, as I said, are a bit difficult, but they're captivating. And I didn't realize how much of this film was going to be a commentary on human psychology and how that shows up in war and how that actually contributes to questions about the morality.
Well, we got quite a bit to discuss with that right over there, but how would you summarize it in an elevator pitch?
Well, if you've ever wanted to learn a bit more about humans but need violent action to keep your attention, this film's for you. Now, with this film, I chose the tarot card Justice, which I think is a fitting one because it represents the balancing of your actions and your values and kind of how those are actually aligning and what is at play with those two.
That's a very interesting take.
All right, so what's your pitch?
It feels like an authentic war movie. It takes a comprehensive look at the paradoxes of war and the toll that it takes on everybody, while managing to keep you entertained the entire time.
Absolutely. Now, let's talk about the cast.
Let's introduce our leading man, Mr. Tom Hanks as Captain John Miller.
Somehow this is actually the first film that we've done on the show with Tom Hanks.
I think Spielberg made the right choice with Hanks for this role. He explained, I was trying very hard to imagine what actor would not immediately want to use his teeth to pull out a pin from a hand grenade.
It's funny. We got some comments on our It's a Wonderful Life episode because we said that Jimmy Stewart was kind of the Tom Hanks of his time. That was a bit backwards because most people would say Tom Hanks is today's Jimmy Stewart, the everyman fatherly figure that we all root for in the end.
I don't like reality TV, but if there was a show that captured his daily life, I would totally watch it.
And there were some other actors considered for his part, right?
Yes, we had Harrison Ford, but there was also Mel Gibson.
Well, in hindsight, it's probably a good choice not to pick Mel Gibson.
Yeah, a lot happened in the last 25 years.
And we'll leave it at that.
The cast also includes Tom Sizemore, who plays Miller's confidant, Mike Horvath. Then there's Edward Burns as Richard Rybin, Jeremy Davies as the timid and inexperienced Timothy Upham.
I was also surprised when I saw the cast list, and then again when I saw him on screen. Vin Diesel as Private First Class Carpazzo, the fast and furious hothead who gets himself killed trying to save a little girl.
It was a little strange watching him act without cars. Around the time he was cast in this movie, he was actually working as a telemarketer.
Wait, can you imagine getting a telemarketing call from Vin Diesel? Hello?
Hi there, would you be interested in getting a reverse mortgage?
And Kevin, your impressions are usually pretty good, but you sound like Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs there.
I'll put more practice into this one.
Yes, that would be very much appreciated.
And we also have more great supporting roles with Adam Goldberg as Private Stanley Fish Mellish.
I love how he taunts the captured Nazis with the Star of David as he's walking past, and he's going, Juden, Juden, Juden.
Then we also have Barry Pepper, who plays the sniper Daniel Jackson.
Yeah, he's always quoting scripture before every shot he fires, which I don't think is exactly keeping with the whole message. Kind of Path of the Righteous Man-esque. But, hey, as a trope, I guess it works here.
Then we also have Giovanni Ribisi as the medic Irwin Wade.
And last but not least, we have Private James Francis Ryan himself, Boston's own Matt Damon.
One of our first episodes was Good Will Hunting, and it turns out Robin Williams introduced him to Spielberg when they were filming the famous public garden scene. Spielberg was filming another movie at the Massachusetts State House at the time.
I always love when we tie it back to New England. You know that. And he did pretty well in this role. Actually, come to think of it, he does pretty well in all his roles. Dare I say it, he's a good actor.
Oh, careful, Coda. Jimmy Kimmel could be listening and he might blacklist us.
Well, we'd be happy to broker a peace deal between them. Don't lie, you'd enjoy it too.
Yeah, you're right.
And it's not just the main cast. We have some great cameos in this film.
Oh, quite a few recognizable faces, like Ted Danson, Paul Giamatti, Bryan Cranston, and Nathan Fillion.
It's funny because he plays the wrong Private Ryan, who they mistakenly tell that his brothers were killed in a bit of a dark comedy bit where he sobs and is saying his brothers are in elementary school.
Yeah, and Hanks and his guys just roll their eyes and they try to say, sorry for the misunderstanding. Your brothers are fine, and they just walk away.
And I know I'm bad with faces, but I could smell the mix-up because he looked familiar, but I knew he wasn't Matt Damon.
Well, a lot of people aren't Matt Damon. Should be pretty easy to narrow down.
Typically, everybody's faces are a blur to me. I usually use scent, but smell-o-vision hasn't really caught on yet. But in this case, I actually used to watch Castle, and he was in that show, and he hadn't aged much, but it looked a little different after 20 years.
That's quite a cast of characters, but I think we should go into detail about the origins of this movie, don't you think?
Absolutely. Take it away.
Producer Mark Gordon reached out to the screenwriter Robert Rodat about collaborating on a movie together. And at the time, Rodat would take his then newborn son for walks around their town in New Hampshire. And there was a memorial for local troops who had been killed in action. And he noticed that there were many occasions where multiple members of the same family were listed.
A quote of his that we found was, "The idea of losing a son to war is painful beyond description. The idea of losing more than one son is inconceivable."
And at that time, he was reading Stephen Ambrose's book about D-Day, which included a story about the four Nyland brothers. Two were killed in combat, one was missing, and the sole survivor that they could find, Fritz, was sent home after multiple days in Normandy.
But thankfully, the missing brother was found.
Yep. So the Nyland family became the Ryan family. Paramount agreed to produce the film, and it was passed to Tom Hanks, who then reached out to Steven Spielberg as they both were talking about how they really wanted to make a movie together.
Now, this is going to sound like a joke, but it's not. Michael Bay was originally hired as the director.
Could you imagine how bad this film would have been if he had been at the helm?
All right, bad is subjective, but I think the final project probably would not have been as iconic.
Well, it was a good fit because Spielberg was raised in a World War II culture. His father was a veteran who fought in the Pacific Theater, and he was also surrounded by plenty of Holocaust survivors when he was growing up.
I love how he explained what drew him to this movie. You're sending 8 people out, all of whom have parents, to rescue one boy and send him back to his mom, where any or all of these kids could have been killed. That was the central tug that made me want to tell this story.
And he had a lot of veterans advising him beforehand, saying, please be honest with the depiction of the war. Please emphasize its brutality.
He even commented that if the movie was made in like 1944, it would have ended with Ryan being found and brought home to his family in a sentimental manner. Which, Kevin, I think you would agree that would have basically taken out the main thing that makes this film so interesting, the morality debate.
To bring it back to Tom Hanks' Jimmy Stewart, Stewart served in World War II, And people noticed a change in him when he returned, especially when it came to his choice of movies, which had darker and more sinister vibes.
People really felt like he captured the entire spirit. Spielberg ended up receiving the Department of Defense Medal for distinguished public service.
Yeah, you hear them reference the War Department throughout the movie, but it was changed to Defense in 1949.
And it was apparently changed back to war in 2025.
Well, let's see how long that lasts. And the movie was released on July 24th, 1998.
Yeah, last episode we talked a bit about the concept of summer booking, and it's relevant here because people thought it was risky to release a nearly 3-hour drama during the summer because generally that time of year families wanted to seek something escapist.
Well, Spielberg makes his own rules, and it worked because it grossed over $480 million at the end of its box office run. $216 million domestically and $265 million overseas.
What was the budget?
$65 million.
Oh, good ROI.
And not only that, Spielberg and Hanks got 40% of the first dollar gross, and Hanks alone took home about 30 to 40 million.
Wow, yeah. Back when people still got paid above the line on the gross earnings. Good times.
And it wasn't just the audience that loved it, it was the critics. Gary Kamiya of Salon.com said, "It will forever change the way people imagine the most important event in the 20th century. That's no small achievement." But not all reviews were flattering. Andrew Saris of the New York Observer flat out called it a pornography of violence and cruelty.
Well, what about those sweet, sweet awards?
It won 3 Oscars, sound editing, cinematography for Janusz Kaminski, and director for Spielberg. And it was nominated for 4 more, including Best Actor for Hanks, Original Screenplay for Rodat, Production Design for Thomas E. Sanders, and Makeup by Lois Burwell.
All right, now, why don't we talk a little bit about the most famous scene, which I want to clarify is not the opening scene. There's a scene right before that where an older Private Ryan is walking through. Now, I also want to clarify this because I was wondering if it was a cemetery or a memorial. Turns out it's both. Normandy, American Cemetery, and Memorial. Because everybody was immediately buried once they were killed, and the families had the choice, if they wanted to repatriate the bodies back to the home country. And others opted to have them permanently buried there.
It's so interesting to note that everybody was sent to 6 days of boot camp, and it was run by Captain Dale Dye. He's a Marine veteran who has served as a technical advisor on so many films and shows. And this also includes Band of Brothers, which is also worth checking out, connected to Spielberg and Hanks. And they did this in order for everyone to gain respect for what it's like to be a soldier.
Yeah, everybody went except for Matt Damon.
They wanted to create a little natural resentment and tension between the actors.
It seems like a nicer, lighter way to work in a bit of method acting, but what was pretty interesting is they couldn't film at Normandy, as French law prohibits large-scale recreations.
And locals understand how somber of a matter this is because nobody uses that beach for recreational purposes.
Yeah, they haven't turned this one into a beachside real estate development yet. I kind of wish I didn't say that because I don't know that anybody's getting any ideas from this podcast.
Well, the location they opted for was Ballinesker Beach in Ireland, which unfortunately has a narrower stretch of land, less than half the distance of what the troops had to cover on June 6, 1944.
Yeah, and they used some of those old camera tricks to make it seem longer than it was.
The Germans actually expected the Allies to attempt an amphibious landing during high tide. So if you remember, as they're landing on the beach, there are all those spikes and poles that they have mines on top of, because they did this with the assumption that, well, when they land, they want to get to the bluffs and to the bunkers as quickly as possible. So they rigged them with mines, but luckily for the Allies, they landed at low tide, and they were able to take cover behind everything.
And that was a bit of a trade-off because then they had a quarter mile to cover to get to the bluffs where they were opened up to gunfire.
Well, it makes me think of Horvath telling Miller when they're in the landing craft getting ready. He's saying, I want to see plenty of beach between the guys. 5 men is a juicy opportunity. 1 guy is a waste of ammo.
That's pretty haunting.
But there's no doubt that this is one of the most revolutionary sequences ever filmed.
I'm pretty sure by the time the scene ended, everybody was thinking, just give Spielberg his Oscar already.
Yep, I agree. Filming took over 4 weeks. It cost about $12 million, and there were approximately 1,500 people involved. About 400 crew, and then there were 1,000 who were members of the Irish Army Reserves, and there were 100 folks who I guess were regular actors, just trying to get the math right.
Yeah, and we had about 30 amputee extras that were fitted with prosthetic limbs. Talk about making it look realistic.
Kaminsky, the cinematographer, he was incredibly worried because he said, if something goes wrong, it'll take half a day to reset.
Fortunately, the majority of the scenes were captured in 4 takes, and Spielberg was satisfied with about 80% of what they had filmed, and they didn't even storyboard any of it.
And the only serious accident that happened was an extra's foot getting run over by a car.
Wow, the veterans must have been so jealous that that was the only casualty.
Yeah, all he needed to do was hobble off the beach to the first aid tent.
And Kaminsky pointed out the weather while filming was cold, rainy, and downcast. Generally, us cinematographers like clouds, but not rain and cold. Luckily, they were recreating D-Day.
They ended up using thousands of gallons of fake blood, which was to turn the ocean and the shoreline red. And they threw prop fish along the battlefield in the waves. And they even threw a floating Bible in there, too, just to match veterans' testimonies about what they saw.
And a little more about Kaminsky's cinematography. Initially, the scene feels very documentary style because the viewer's supposed to really feel like they're part of the war. And then after some incredible underwater shots, the camera work gets much more traditionally cinematic, or we start seeing some steady cam moves, shallow depth of field. He also plays a ton with the camera shutter throughout the entire film, but especially in this scene where he opted for a smaller shutter angle than the usual 180, which makes for a much more grittier and staccato visual, and he was not afraid to get the camera dirty.
Well, all the sand and fake blood would get into the lens, which unintentionally created an incredibly realistic vibe.
I'm sure Panavision was thrilled when they got that equipment back.
Well, Tom Hanks talked about how horrifying it could be filming this scene. He knew it was all special effects, but it seemed incredibly realistic. No doubt, I think one aspect of cinematography that impressed me the most was the color grading.
Yeah, it does have a pretty unique look to it, and that evokes a bit of a old newsreel kind of vibe. It is actually a process called bleach bypass, which would often be accomplished by skipping a step in the film development process. So the metallic silver particles remain in along with the dyes to create a much more contrasty and muted look. Nowadays, most people would do this through color grading, and for a period of time, it was really something you had to tell the lab to do if you wanted the look. Some of the labs will even still do it now, but they'll want you to pay probably a little extra, even though you're skipping a step. It involves reconfiguring the machinery.
It was all to match their inspiration, the photojournalism of Robert Capa on D-Day. Again, it was all for authenticity. They wanted everything to look like this was coming from a newsreel footage from the 1940s, desaturated and low-tech.
Yeah, Kappa is stills are black and white, but it's very similar, high contrast. It really makes for that surreal scene. And a lot of the color photography and film from the time was actually a 2-color system, which also produced incredibly muted tones. How did the veterans react to all this?
They were grateful. So many veterans talked about how it brought back the memories of what was racing through their mind with all those thoughts 50 years earlier.
So bittersweet, I guess. Huh.
Well, one veteran who showed appreciation was James Doohan, and he played Scotty the engineer on the original Star Trek. He commended Spielberg for not sparing the blood and guts, and he actually served in the Canadian Army.
The Canadian Army?
Yeah, it turns out he faked the Scottish accent for the show because while he was auditioning, they let him play around with so many accents. And he opted for the Scottish one because he thought Scottish engineers have the best reputation. And he was accidentally hit by friendly fire the next day and ended up losing his middle finger.
Well, at least he got to go home.
But the big theme in this movie is the moral ambiguity of war.
Yeah, we both noticed the fact that X-Ray, that Amazon Prime feature that displays facts, said that 2 soldiers surrendering in that scene were shot anyway, and they were actually speaking Czech when they were trying to surrender.
Oh, yeah. It turns out those guys were part of what was called, I hope I got this right, the Ostbataillon, translated as the East Battalion. Those were Eastern conscripts who were forced to fight in secondary positions.
So, basically prisoners/slaves.
Yeah, exactly. And what they're actually saying in the subtitles, if you pay attention, they're saying, don't shoot, we didn't kill anybody.
And there's a dramatic irony to the character of Steamboat Willie. He's the only survivor after they take out his whole crew and are ready to execute him on the spot. Upham, the timid translator, says they should spare him because of the rules of warfare, and he ends up going back to the German military and ultimately ends up killing Captain Miller.
That's also the moment where Upham has his rite of passage, and when he surrenders again, this time, he has no problem killing him.
Well, as old W would say, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me, you can't get fooled again.
You know that's not the expression, especially if W said it.
I know. But this also has me thinking about Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Like, morality is put on the back burner for a bit. Fear is in the driver's seat, which I mean makes sense from a survival standpoint, but morality is about suppressing animalistic instincts in some cases and then indulging them in others.
Thank you, Socrates.
It's Socrates.
Good God.
Good gods. That's what Socrates would have wanted.
But, 27 years later after its release, the movie still holds up. AFI included it on their 10th anniversary of their 100 Years, 100 Movies list. Rotten Tomatoes has a 94% fresh rating, and this is based on 149 critics' reviews, and they included it in their 300 Essential Movies list.
And we've talked about the U.S. National Film Registry, a part of the Library of Congress, with several of our other movies, and this one was submitted in 2014. So, we could have picked any war movie for Veterans Day. Why did you pick this one apart from its legacy? Why a World War II movie?
Well, I picked this one because we're at the 80th anniversary of the war's end. And unfortunately, we're witnessing some historic revisionism surrounding Hitler and the Nazis. We have this rosy image in which America stepped up to the plate against tyranny, but it turns out a large portions of Americans were sympathetic to Hitler, kind of like some people today are sympathetic to Vladimir Putin and Viktor Orban.
And not just sympathetic, they actually liked him. In the first issue of Captain America, the hero was punching Hitler in one of the panels, and the publisher got quite a bit of negativity and pushback for it.
Well, people forget there was actually a big Nazi rally inside Madison Square Garden just before the war began in 1939.
And we always like to bring up Conan O'Brien, and this example is fitting because Tom Hanks's episode on his show, they mentioned a compound near LA The Murphy Ranch. It was built in the 1930s by Nazi sympathizers. Well, let's be realistic. Nazis. And it was raided by the government the day after Pearl Harbor.
And you want to know what was the most terrifying thing about all of this?
What?
Hitler was never elected.
What?
So here's a little civics lesson about the Weimar Republic, which was set up after the end of World War I and before the Nazis fully took over. The chancellor was never elected. He was appointed by the president, and he was supposed to manage just the government and the Reichstag, their legislative body. They had so many split political parties, and the vote was always split. They never reached the proper majority, so nothing was ever passed into law. And you don't need to know too much about the history of the Weimar Republic to know how terrible things were in Germany. And Franz von Papen, he was an aristocrat who had served as chancellor. He despised the Weimar Republic, and he wanted to bring back the Kaiser-like government before World War I.
Well, you can't say it's not efficient.
Well, von Papen believed that despite the insanity of the Nazis, they could be allies to form a voting bloc, and they could actually get stuff done. He offered a compromise, and the Nazis wanted Hitler installed as chancellor. You know, he thought Hitler was nutty and dumb, but he believed the checks and balances could contain him. But within months, Hitler consolidated power, he bypassed the checks and balances, and most of von Papen's allies were killed a year later during the Night of the Long Knives. He barely escaped death.
I'm going to give a little more philosophic insight. I forget who articulated it so eloquently. You don't with crazy.
Well, we probably learned this in our history classes, but forgot about it because we thought we'd never experienced something like that.
So, what about our next movie? It's the holiday season. It's around the corner, and Kevin and I opted for a combined pick, A Christmas Carol.
But to be more specific,
The Muppet Christmas Carol.
Wonderful transition. Nazis to Muppets. Never thought I'd say a sentence like that.
Well, hardly the strangest thing we've said on this show, but I think this one's going to be a real treat. I'm Cody Yule.
And I'm Kevin Gainey. Tune in next time for The Muppet Christmas Carol.
Moviehouse Mystics, hosted by Kevin Gainey and me, Cody Yule. Theme music by The Fat Brat. Tune in next time for The Muppet Christmas Carol.